Orion was a man of unassuming height, yet possessed a steeliness of posture and a gaze that missed nothing. Rumor had it that he was half pirate, half scholar, born in the dusty archives of an abandoned space station. Others insisted that he had grown up in the lawless fringe, scouring for relics among the debris fields of ancient battles. Whatever the truth, Orion had a singular reputation. If an artifact existed, no matter how rare, Orion would find it. The Dominion's markets had grown exceptionally lucrative for artifact hunters of late. Arcus's thirst for power knew no bounds, and he often employed smugglers and mercenaries to scour the galaxy for relics rumored to hold extraordinary properties. Priceless alien crystals, archaic technology from vanquished empires, tablets etched with secrets older than recorded history. Arcus hoarded them all. In the seedy underbelly of a marketplace on Draconis III, Orion first heard a whisper about the next big auction. The rumor was half-mad, an actual relic of Dominion craftsmanship, guaranteed to grant dominion over a living being. That last phrase sounded too outlandish to be true, and yet the rumor refused to die. In Orion's many travels, he had stumbled upon enough bizarre contraptions to know that truth often straddled the line of the unbelievable. Indeed, sometimes it soared right across that line and never looked back. So Orion found himself aboard a creaking shuttle bound for the Dominion Citadel, of all places. The Citadel was not merely a fortress. It was also a colossal market for secrets, with hidden chambers where unscrupulous traders sold everything from exotic creatures to black market weaponry. Emperor Arcus actively encouraged certain illicit dealings, perhaps to cultivate fear or to gather more contraband for his endless appetites. Orion suspected Arcus wanted to keep these black market circles close, so he could control them more effectively. Wearing a plain brown cloak and nondescript tunic, Orion stepped off the shuttle into the Citadel's public zone. The vast concourse bustled with travelers, many of them forced to display identity badges, scanning them through the security gates. Orion had prepared carefully forged credentials that marked him as a minor official from a backwater mining colony. He kept his head low, his eyes keen behind tinted lenses that disguised his features. He had more than mere forgery to rely on. Over the years, he had acquired a small device that emitted a subtle frequency, scrambling the Dominion's basic biometric scanners. It was not foolproof, but it often passed a cursory inspection. Orion felt a bead of sweat trickle down his neck when a guard with a sculpted breastplate and suspicious eyes asked for his papers, scanned them, then waved him through. The corridor into the Citadel's interior looked like a sprawling labyrinth. Beyond a maze of corridors and lifts, Orion arrived at the hidden marketplace, which lay inside the Citadel's lower rings. Comprised of interconnected corridors bathed in eerie violet lights, the area was a patchwork of stalls, cargo crates, and curtained alcoves. Here, Dominion guards patrolled with feigned disinterest, turning a blind eye to the underhanded dealings so long as a share of the profit lined Arcus's pockets. Orion navigated this dimly lit bazaar with practiced ease, pausing at a vendor peddling counterfeit stasis capsules, then pretending to be intrigued by an antique weapon. He needed to locate the specific traders who specialized in high-value auctions, the ones that took place behind sealed blast doors. Patience was necessary, as was a willingness to remain inconspicuous. So he meandered, and he listened. At length, Orion caught wind of a hush that fell over one secluded area. He followed the subdued murmurs to a hallway flanked by heavily armed guards. Guests in formal attire were being admitted in small numbers. Two mechanical pillars stood on either side of the entrance, scanning retinas and verifying credentials. Once the guard at the door accepted Orion's forged pass, the heavy blast door slid open, revealing a lavish chamber. Ornate columns shaped like twisted serpents soared into a vaulted ceiling. Hovering platforms displayed samples of the night's auction items, each platform surrounded by a rotating holographic aura to highlight its prized artifact. Dozens of well-dressed bidders sipped elaborate cocktails, muttering quietly in clusters. A hush of expectation lingered in the air, thick with tension and greed. On one platform, Orion saw a clear orb, no larger than a closed fist, inscribed with alien runes that pulsed with a faint silver light. Another display showed the hilt of a broken sword, allegedly from an ancient Star Knight order. Yet none of these items resonated with the rumor Orion pursued. He slowly circled the hall, stepping near platforms to study the swirling inscriptions, careful not to draw attention. Just as he was beginning to suspect the rumor might have been exaggerated, a hush fell over the chamber. The lights dimmed, and a robed auctioneer stepped forward on a raised dais. Tall, slender, with a polished manner, the auctioneer wore a translucent visor that glowed with data feeds. In a practiced tone that commanded silent awe, the auctioneer announced that they had a final lot reserved for the most discerning collectors, one that would break the boundaries of what was deemed possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer said, drawing out each syllable, "please direct your gaze to the central platform." All eyes turned. The central platform rose from the floor, accompanied by a soft mechanical hum. On it rested a curious bracelet. It appeared unremarkable in design, a dark metal band, inscribed with minuscule glyphs. Yet from Orion's vantage, he sensed a faint, almost imperceptible energy emanating from it. "This is an artifact believed to be reverse-engineered from Dominion's own classified research," the auctioneer continued in a hushed voice. "With the correct input sequence, it is said to control the mind and loyalty of an individual, no matter their inherent power. Whether this relic can truly enslave a being of immense ability is for the buyer to discover and profit from." A silent chill crept across Orion's spine. He had seen too many horrors inflicted by unscrupulous souls, and the idea of a device that stripped away free will disturbed him deeply. Yet something in his instincts whispered that this was why he had come. The rumor was not only real, it was here. Bidding commenced, and wealthy patrons raised small rods that sent signals to the dais. Orion noticed that the sums escalated at a dizzying pace. He had foreseen this and arranged for substantial credit lines under various aliases, enough to match moderate competition. Yet the fervor spiraled beyond even his calculations. Certain faces in the crowd, cloaked in shadow, seemed all too eager to possess a tool of such control. The price soared higher, the tension pulsing through the chamber. Orion steeled himself. He wondered if he could snatch the bracelet in some cunning manner, or if direct bidding was his only option. For a moment, he doubted his capacity to outbid the wealthiest collectors. But the potential consequences of letting this artifact fall into cruel hands were too dire to ignore. So, with a calm he barely felt, Orion raised his rod. He bid an astronomical sum. Whispers rippled across the chamber. A few other bidders countered, each time pushing the sum toward an unthinkable figure. Orion matched them, beads of sweat forming on his brow, his heart pounding. At last, a hush descended once more. No one else dared to raise the stakes. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, almost reverentially, to the gentleman in the brown cloak. Within moments, discreet attendants beckoned Orion to a side corridor. It was standard procedure for finalizing sales of high-value items. Verify the payment, transfer the artifact. Orion followed, exuding a confidence he did not completely feel. In a small, opulent chamber, he settled the transaction with complex digital keys that routed funds from multiple off-world accounts. The official, scanning the transaction, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Another attendant presented the bracelet, now placed carefully in a stasis field. Orion studied it closely. The inscriptions almost seemed alive, shifting in subtle patterns. He felt a twinge of something, an echo, a resonance, as though the bracelet recognized him. Once the transaction was complete, Orion tucked the artifact inside a protective pouch and slipped it into a hidden compartment beneath his cloak. The official nodded politely, motioning him toward a side exit that would lead back into the Citadel's labyrinthine corridors. Stepping back into the hallway, Orion let out a breath. The weight of the device pressed against his side. He was now in possession of something truly dangerous. Though it was described as a relic that could control loyalty, he suspected it was part of a larger system, one that had enslaved individuals far more powerful than any mortal should attempt to bend to their will. That was when the first alarm sounded, a muted klaxon that reverberated through the corridor. Guards in polished armor rushed past, barking orders. Orion melted into an alcove, trying to remain unseen, but the chatter he overheard was unsettling. They mentioned Emperor Arcus by name. He was apparently alert to some unexpected presence. A stowaway, they said. A disturbance, they said. Orion pressed himself against the wall, cursing his luck. He needed to find a safe place to examine the artifact, or, at the very least, find a route off the citadel. Navigating the hallways proved complicated by the sudden security crackdown. Eventually, Orion found himself near a series of larger turbolifts that descended to the citadel's lower levels. A glance at his handheld scanner informed him that sublevels housed prisons, labs, and restricted sectors. Precisely the kind of forbidden territory that he had no desire to wander. But the upper levels were overrun by Dominion troopers. Sometimes, in a fortress, the safest place to hide is in the least likely location, deep in the bowels, where few dared to tread. He waited until a group of scientists exited a turbolift, then slipped inside. The control panel required a key code, but Orion improvised with a hacking tool, feeding in data gleaned from various Dominion frequencies. The doors slid shut, carrying him into the depths below. The temperature dropped, and the lights in the sublevel corridors were faint, tinted red. Alarms echoed distantly, but here, the thick walls seemed to contain the commotion above. As Orion stepped into the corridor, he was greeted by an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the hum of power conduits coursing through the walls. He pressed on, following the map on his handheld device. Along the way, he passed reinforced doors with cryptic labels: experimental wing, biocontainment, chrono research. The further he went, the heavier his heart grew, for he realized the Dominion's cruelty extended far beyond any rumor. This labyrinth was dedicated to perpetual torment, in the name of Arcus's insatiable hunger for power. At last, Orion's scanner indicated a minor storage room off the main corridor. He ducked inside, ignoring the stench of ozone and stale air. Shelves lined the walls, packed with containers of unknown substances. He found a small workstation and coaxed it to life, hoping to analyze the bracelet. Carefully, he removed it from his pouch and laid it on the console. The inscriptions flickered, responding to the proximity of the station's scanners. "Let's see what you really are," Orion muttered under his breath. He ran a basic spectral analysis. Within moments, the station beeped angrily, red lights dancing across the screen. The readings proved inconsistent, as though the artifact resisted scanning. Still, Orion gleaned a few fragments of data. The bracelet was composed of a rare hyperalloy, and the inscriptions were not purely decorative. They formed a code that tapped into gravitational fields, quantum entanglement, and neural wave patterns. In short, it was an advanced piece of Dominion craftsmanship, meant to tether someone's mind and will. A controlling device? Yes, but incomplete. The code on the bracelet implied there was a specific host or target. Orion's sense of unease sharpened. Had the Dominion intended to pair this device with a particular prisoner? Possibly. The rumor spoke of controlling a being of immense power. He recalled that the advertisement at the auction had called it reverse-engineered. Reverse-engineered from what? Or whom? He considered destroying it then and there, but something stayed his hand. If this device was linked to a victim, destroying it might endanger that individual. Or it might leave them enslaved forever. Perhaps there was a means to free them using the very technology designed to confine. With a shake of his head, Orion realized he needed more answers, and the only place to find them would be deeper in the Citadel's restricted archives, or perhaps in the prison cells themselves. Packing up quickly, he slipped back into the hallway. Though the alarms had faded, an oppressive tension remained. At the end of the corridor, he found a heavy security door requiring a complex passcode. Yet the panel also allowed manual overrides, likely for maintenance. Orion crouched next to it, hacking the mechanism with his portable device. The seconds stretched into tense minutes as the lock beeped ominously. But with a final click, the door slid open, revealing a narrow passage. He crept forward. The corridor beyond was dark, illuminated only by sporadic emergency lights that cast wavering shadows on the metal walls. Then, abruptly, the passage opened into a vast chamber. Gigantic pillars rose from a floor that sloped downward, each pillar adorned with glowing cables leading to a central platform. On that platform stood a stasis pod, and though Orion could only see it from a distance, his heart thudded in his chest. The pod was not vacant. A tall figure was encased behind the curved glass, a woman, her features somewhat ethereal, her hair suspended weightlessly around her face. She wore a sleek suit that looked more ceremonial than protective, and her closed eyes suggested a deep slumber or some manner of suspended animation. In her slender arms, he sensed a subdued tension, as though she was ready to awaken and unleash something fierce. A display console nearby scrolled lines of alien text. Intrigued and cautious, Orion approached. The text revealed the occupant's identity, Selena, described as a gravitic manipulator of unparalleled potential. His pulse raced as he read further. Selena had been under Dominion custody for centuries, forced to serve as a living weapon whenever Arcus willed it, her mind bound to an enslaving device. The console beeped again, referencing a control brace that regulated her neural frequencies. Control brace. The word struck Orion like a thunderbolt. The device he had purchased, the so-called artifact from the auction, was the missing piece of a dreadful puzzle. The Dominion had presumably separated it from her to prevent any risk of unauthorized usage. Perhaps Arcus had intended to reacquire it. The entire auction might have been a front, orchestrated by Dominion agents to lure wealthy patrons and glean funds, or to set a trap. The possibilities were endless. In that moment, Orion understood that Selena was the being the rumors spoke of, the one enslaved by a device that turned her powers into a Dominion asset. Outrage ignited in his chest. No one deserved centuries of servitude. And as a self-styled liberator of oppressed wonders, Orion felt a responsibility to intervene. Of course, it was an insane risk. Freeing her might unleash unimaginable chaos, yet leaving her entombed was unthinkable. Steeling himself, Orion approached the stasis pod. He carefully tapped at the console, searching for a release sequence. The stasis fields hummed. Additional security systems demanded a code. He tried to override them with his hack tool. It was a tense process, each beep a question of whether the entire Dominion Guard might storm in at any second. But the more lines of code he passed, the closer he came to success. Finally, the display showed green. With a pneumatic hiss, the glass dome slid up, releasing a cold mist that billowed around Selena's motionless form. Seconds passed, and her eyelids fluttered. She inhaled as though drawing her first breath in eons. Weak at first, she opened her eyes, bright, piercing, tinged with silent fury. Orion raised his hands to show he was not a threat. "Selena," he said softly, unsure whether she would understand him. "I'm here to help." Her gaze flicked to him, then around the chamber. Something in her expression wavered between suspicion and desperate hope. Her voice, when it came, carried an otherworldly cadence. "Why?" she asked, her tone trembling. "Why would you risk it?" He swallowed hard. "Because no one deserves to be a prisoner," he said simply. "I think I have a piece of the device, the one that's binding you. I bought it at an auction. I want to sever its hold over you." She seemed to struggle, as though fighting invisible chains within her mind. "That device, it locks onto my consciousness, compels me to obey Arcus. He uses me as his weapon. I cannot resist it fully, not without that missing piece." Orion carefully brought out the bracelet. A faint glow pulsed along its edges, as though resonating with Selena's awakened aura. She stared at it, and for a moment, her body tensed in fear, recognizing an instrument of torment that had long dominated her life. But Orion whispered, "I'll try to reprogram it. Free you, or at least break Arcus's hold. You have my word." She nodded with a cautious kind of trust. The hatred in her gaze, intended for Arcus, simmered under the surface. For all her power, she was vulnerable, battered by centuries of subjugation. Orion's heart clenched at the suffering etched across her face. Time was not on their side. At any moment, the Dominion's security forces would track them down. But in that dark, silent chamber, Orion began scanning the device's inscriptions anew, cross-referencing them with the console's systems. It was a maddening puzzle, a swirl of quantum code meshed with archaic glyphs. One wrong input might trigger failsafes, or worse, strengthen the device's hold on Selena. Outside, he heard the distant tramp of armored boots. Guards, perhaps. He worked faster, his hands trembling. Selena closed her eyes, focusing on something within her, harnessing a flicker of her gift. The air around them grew heavier, as if gravity itself coiled in readiness, though she kept it carefully contained. Finally, with a stifled cry, Orion found a bridging command. He tapped in a final sequence. The bracelet's inscriptions glowed bright, then flickered. Selina gasped. A wave of invisible force pulsed from her, rattling the metal platform. Then silence descended. Selina slumped slightly, breathing heavily. When she raised her eyes to Orion, they shone with cautious relief. "I feel less tethered," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. "It's not gone entirely, but the chain has weakened." Orion let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "We might have turned it into something else," he said, fiddling with the bracelet. "The loyalty compulsion, maybe it's altered, reconfigured. It's no longer a chain, but a bond that you control." She reached out, her slender fingers brushing the bracelet's surface. It glowed in response, as though acknowledging her presence. "I'm not enslaved by it," she whispered, "but I can sense your intent. Almost like a link formed between us, yet not one of oppression." Orion nodded slowly. "A bond of choice, if you will. Let's hope it remains so." A loud clank echoed through the chamber, followed by the hiss of a door sliding open. Dominion troopers poured in, weapons raised. "Freeze," one of them barked. "Step away from the prisoner." Selina's eyes flared. Now that she was freed, at least partially, her powers were at her fingertips. She glanced at Orion, who gave a subtle nod. The troopers advanced, but suddenly the floor trembled. The air felt heavy, as if it bore the weight of 1,000 suns. In a swift motion, Selina raised her hands, and the gravity in front of the troopers intensified. They cried out in alarm, pinned to the floor as their armors groaned under the augmented weight. "Let's go," Orion urged. Together, they darted out of the chamber, leaving the troopers struggling in their wake. With Selina's formidable powers regaining strength, they might stand a chance of escaping the Citadel and confronting the terrible Emperor Arcus himself. Escaping the Citadel's subterranean labs proved an immediate challenge. More alarms blared, and every corridor bristled with Dominion soldiers. Selina, still reeling from her partial liberation, used her abilities sparingly but effectively, warping gravitational fields to create pockets of disarray. Doors slammed shut on unsuspecting squads, corridors bent in subtle ways that redirected pursuers, and illusions of compressed space caused confusion. Orion marveled at the ease with which she manipulated the fundamental forces of physics. Yet he also saw the strain etched on her face, reminding him that centuries of stasis had taken a toll. They reached a cargo platform where a dozen Dominion troopers blocked their path. The platform overlooked a vast docking bay for smaller Dominion craft. Escape pods, gunships, and maintenance shuttles cluttered the space. Unfortunately, the troopers had taken up fortified positions. A battered security droid patrolled the platform's edge. Its optical sensors glowed, scanning for intruders. Orion cursed under his breath. If they engaged directly, Selina might handle the troopers, but it would drain her further. He weighed the risk. Sensing his hesitation, Selina steadied her breathing and lifted her hand, focusing on the cluster of crates stacked near the troopers. With a soft groan of metal, the crates began to shift, sliding across the floor at unnatural angles. For a moment, the troopers gaped at this gravity-defying movement. Then Selina spun her wrist, and the crates hurled forward, scattering the soldiers. Alarms rang anew, but the path was momentarily clear. "Go!" Selina shouted. They sprinted across the open platform. One soldier recovered quickly, firing a stun bolt. Orion felt the heat of the shot was past his arm. Selina flicked her fingers, increasing local gravity around the soldier's weapon, causing it to drop from his grip with a resounding clang. They dove behind a bulkhead. Orion reached out, frantically tapping commands into a docking station console. If they could override a docking clamp, maybe they could commandeer one of the smaller ships. Yet the console beeped angrily. Unauthorized access. "Keep them busy," Orion urged Selina. She gave a resolute nod. Her eyes glowed with fierce determination as she stepped back onto the platform, letting the gravitational flux coil around her. One soldier launched a rocket-propelled projectile, but Selina caught it mid-flight, halting it in a swirl of twisting air. With a fluid gesture, she reversed its trajectory, sending it back. The resulting explosion threw the troopers into disarray. Meanwhile, Orion managed to breach the console's security protocols using every trick in his data hacker's arsenal. At last, the clamps disengaged for a small craft that hovered on a landing pad at the bay's far edge. It was an older model scout ship, not heavily armed, but hopefully swift enough to flee the citadel. Selena dashed back to Orion's side, her breaths ragged. "The path is open," she gasped. "But we must move quickly." Together, they sprinted to the scout ship. The engine hummed in readiness, lights blinking in the cockpit. Orion sealed the hatch behind them. Dominion troopers, some battered but unbroken, rushed forward with weapons raised. But Selena slammed down a wave of amplified gravity that pinned them momentarily to the deck. Orion powered up the thrusters, feeling the ship vibrate with barely contained energy. Without hesitation, they launched, the craft rocketing out of the docking bay into the star-pocked void. The citadel loomed behind them like a monolith of dark ambition, bristling with defensive cannons. Red lights flared along its hull as Arcus's forces prepared to fire. "Hang on," Orion shouted, pushing the engines to their limit. A barrage of energy beams lit up the vacuum of space. Selena, her eyes half closed, channeled her abilities through the hull. She couldn't shield them completely from sustained fire, but she manipulated gravitational waves around the ship, causing projectiles to veer off course just enough to avoid a direct hit. Still, one beam clipped the scout's flank, jolting them violently. The control panels sparked, warning indicators flashing. Orion fought to keep them steady, weaving around the continuous barrage. If they didn't make a jump to lightspeed soon, they would be vaporized. Fortunately, in the shadow of the citadel, gravity wells and interdiction fields were minimal. Arcus relied more on direct firepower than on sophisticated gravity traps. Orion punched in a series of coordinates he had memorized for emergency jumps, random, but distant enough to lose pursuit. The hyperdrive whined, powering up. Then, with a brilliant flash, they soared into faster-than-light travel, leaving the citadel behind. Inside the cockpit, both of them slumped. Orion's heart pounded in his ears, adrenaline coursing through every fiber of his being. Selena closed her eyes, leaning back in the co-pilot's seat. Sweat beaded her temples, though she seemed more at peace now than she had been in that stasis pod. After a few moments, Orion took a stabilizing breath. "We've escaped. For now." Selena nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice hushed. "I've dreamt for centuries about leaving that accursed place. But Arcus, he will not rest until he reclaims what he believes is his." Orion let out a mirthless laugh. "Arcus may be powerful, but we're free, and we have the device." He tapped the hidden compartment where he kept it. "Or, rather, we have something greater than the device itself, a chance to break his hold." She studied him, curiosity kindling behind her eyes. "Tell me, Orion," she said softly, "why risk so much for a stranger?" He hesitated, grappling with his own motivations. "I suppose," he replied slowly, "I've seen too many people crushed by the Dominion. I grew up an orphan, scavenging relics to survive. Over time, I learned that certain artifacts weren't just trinkets. They were instruments of tyranny. I started liberating them from collectors, returning them to those who could secure or destroy them. When I heard rumors of an artifact that could enslave a living being, I had to act. I never expected." He glanced at her, letting his words trail off. Selena nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "I see. Then you are more than just a profiteering treasure hunter." Orion shrugged. "I won't deny I've sold artifacts for coin, but some lines shouldn't be crossed." Silence descended, broken by the hum of the hyperdrive. Selena finally shifted. "Arcus will muster his forces. If he regains control of me, he will use my powers to crush entire star systems. We can't hide forever." Orion nodded grimly. "I suspect you're right. So what do you suggest?" She fixed him with a determined gaze. "We must strike at Arcus directly, destroy his seat of power, or at the very least, sever his capacity to enslave me and others like me. It's time his regime crumbles." Though the notion of taking on Arcus head-on was daunting, Orion felt a peculiar stirring of hope. With Selena's gravity-warping abilities and the knowledge he had gleaned from countless hunts, perhaps they stood a chance, though it would be the greatest risk of their lives. The scout ship dropped out of hyperspace near a remote star system, its single yellow sun gleaming amid a field of cosmic dust. Orion guided the craft toward an uncharted planet, ringed by pale debris that glimmered like shards of crystal. He knew a hidden outpost there, a safe house he had established years ago in case he ever needed to lie low. They descended through swirling clouds to a surface of rocky plains and shimmering caves. With caution, Orion landed the ship inside a concealed grotto, masking its energy signature behind natural mineral deposits. Once the engines powered down, a hush enveloped them. Stepping onto the planet's surface, Selena breathed in the untainted air, her expression colored by wonder and relief. The sky above was a swirl of pinkish-orange, lit by a star that hovered near the horizon. Dust motes sparkled in the faint light. Orion led her deeper into the grotto, where he had stashed supplies, rations, and a basic workstation. He also possessed a modest library of data crystals. Flicking on battery-powered lamps, he turned to her. "You should rest," he said kindly, noting the weariness in her face. She nodded, but insisted on understanding more about her predicament. While Orion prepared a meager meal of dehydrated protein and water, Selena studied the device again, using the portable analysis tool. She noted that the reconfiguration Orion had executed in the Citadel's lab had indeed altered the fundamental coding of the artifact. "It's no longer purely a slave device," she murmured. "It's as though it's been repurposed to synchronize with my neural patterns and your intent. I can't explain it completely, but there's a piece of your empathy woven into it now." Orion raised an eyebrow. "My empathy?" She managed a small laugh. "Your genuine desire to free me, not to own me." The device's quantum structure responded to that emotion. "Instead of forcing me to obey, it's granting me a choice and linking us." He mulled over this revelation. Technological wonders of the Dominion often bordered on the mystical. "Then what does that mean for us?" "It means we share a bond that is unusual, but not malevolent," she said. "I can sense your presence, your emotional state, to some extent. If I focus, I can even see glimpses of your intentions. But it doesn't feel like enslavement. It feels more like synergy." Orion felt his cheeks warm. It was profoundly intimate, yet not intrusive. "That's a relief," he muttered. "Better than the alternative." She agreed quietly, her gaze drifting to the data crystals Orion had scattered across a crate. "An Arcus?" Orion's brow furrowed. "Emperor Arcus is known for his paranoia. He rarely leaves the Dominion Citadel, but that fortress can move. It's like a massive battleship in its own right. He also commands legions of loyal soldiers, advanced weaponry, and an entire network of informants. Striking at him directly is close to suicide." Selena's eyes flared with iron resolve. "Yet we must. I have no illusions of walking back into that lair alone, relying solely on my gifts. But there may be a weakness. In centuries past, I sometimes overheard Arcus speaking of a power source, a hidden reactor that feeds his throne world. If that reactor were destroyed, the Citadel's systems would collapse. He would be forced to emerge from his fortress, and in that vulnerability, we might stand a chance." Orion considered her words. "Then the question becomes, how do we find it and sabotage it without being annihilated by his defenses?" Selena reached out to a data crystal. "I suspect records of that reactor might exist in old Dominion logs. Logs that the Dominion themselves might have lost or buried. If we can find them, perhaps on a planet once conquered by Arcus or in a hidden Dominion archive, we could glean the location and exploit it." He nodded. "I know someone who might help, an old associate named Rurik. He used to be a high-ranking Dominion engineer until he defected. He's been in hiding, but if we can track him down, he might have knowledge of Arcus's architecture." Though Selena was fatigued, she urged Orion to contact Rurik immediately. Time was of the essence. Emperor Arcus would soon discover how they had tampered with Selena's device, and the hunt would intensify. Orion used a secure transmitter rigged to bounce signals through multiple relays. The message he sent was encoded in a personal cipher Rurik would recognize. It read, "A relic has been awakened. Need your guidance. Coordinates attached." Several hours passed in tense silence. Selena meditated, recentering herself after her violent liberation. Orion fiddled with the scout ship's damaged systems, patching them up as best he could. Eventually, a faint beep signaled an incoming reply on the transmitter. A hushed voice, scrambled by encryption, broke through the static. "Orion, you dare contact me now of all times? The Dominion hunts you, you fool. I can't risk." "Rurik, I have leverage," Orion cut in, speaking quietly. "A living weapon freed from Arcus's grasp. She's crucial to toppling him. We need data on the Citadel's reactor." A brief pause. "I see," Rurik responded, his tone turning thoughtful. I'll consider. Meet me at the coordinates I'm sending. No Dominion satellites. Come alone or with your companion. But if you bring trouble, I'll vanish forever. Understood. Orion exhaled. Understood. The transmission ended. Orion looked up to see Selena regarding him gravely. We have a lead, he said. But we'll have to be cautious. Rurik doesn't trust easily. She nodded. Nor do I. Yet we have no choice. They spent the night in restless vigilance, each haunted by the knowledge that Arcus's vengeance was a step behind them. The safe house was far from comfortable. The planet's relentless wind howled through the grotto, and the meager rations barely sated their hunger. But for Selena, it was her first taste of freedom in centuries, a freedom she clung to, fragile yet precious. At dawn, they left the sanctuary of the grotto. Orion guided the scout ship through the planet's atmosphere, setting coordinates for the rendezvous. The flight was uneasy. Selena sensed that their presence, and her newly altered bond with Orion, left a distinct energy trace. Could Arcus track them through it? They didn't know, but the possibility loomed. Hours later, they emerged near a drifting asteroid belt. The coordinates led them to an abandoned mining station, built into the side of a large asteroid that tumbled slowly in the darkness. No visible signs of activity, though a faint docking beacon blinked at them. Orion maneuvered carefully, scanning for traps. Finding none, he docked on a platform that jutted out from the asteroid's surface. Airlock seals engaged with a pneumatic hiss. Once inside, they found the station in disrepair, dim emergency lights, flickering screens, corridors lined with broken equipment. Selena's eyes darted warily, her posture tense. Orion tapped on a door panel, following the faint life sign reading on his handheld. The door slid open, revealing a cramped control room. Amid a clutter of wires, cables, and half-assembled consoles stood Rurik. Tall, gaunt, with a once regal bearing, he bore the look of a man who had survived too many close calls. A mechanical brace clung to his left arm, humming softly. Orion. Rurik's voice was terse. His gaze flicked to Selena. And your companion. Who? He stopped abruptly, recognition dawning in his eyes. Perhaps he had seen Selena's image in Dominion records, or heard rumors describing her unique aura. A mixture of awe and fear crossed his face. She's the one Arcus enslaved, Rurik whispered. I never thought. Selena inclined her head, mustering politeness. I am Selena, she said quietly. No longer under Arcus's thrall. Rurik cast a meaningful look at Orion. You realize the entire Dominion will be after you now. Arcus doesn't forgive those who steal his prized assets. Orion shrugged. He already wants my head. This doesn't change much. Look, Rurik, we need your help. Selena says Arcus's fortress relies on a hidden reactor. You were an engineer for the Dominion. Do you know anything about it? Rurik hesitated, chewing on his lip. Arcus always was secretive. But I recall rumors of an experimental power source that predated the Citadel's current design. Something older than Arcus himself, an arc reactor built from ancient technology. He installed it in the Citadel's core, or so the stories say, harnessing it for both propulsion and defense. Selena's gaze narrowed. If we destroy it, will the Citadel's systems fall? Rurik frowned. In theory, yes. The Citadel would be severely compromised, forced to rely on backup reactors. But those backups might be enough to keep it operational, at least partially. And the risk, if that reactor is truly ancient, there might be catastrophic side effects. We're talking about a meltdown that could tear a hole in subspace if done recklessly. Orion exchanged a glance with Selena. We don't want to destroy the galaxy, just Arcus's tyranny. There must be a safer way. Rurik looked pensive. If you could disable the arc reactor's main conduits, you'd render it dormant, but not explosive. Then the Citadel would be helpless until Arcus found a replacement power source. He'd have no choice but to flee or face a mutiny. But even getting close enough to do that, he shook his head. Security is unimaginable. Selena lifted her chin. We'll find a way. My powers can tip the scales if we're careful. Rurik studied her. Arcus never gave you full freedom, not even for a second. He used you as a puppet, I heard. But if you control your own abilities now, perhaps that is the edge you need. Eager for any advantage, Orion asked, do you have schematics or coordinates? With a sigh, Rurik rummaged through a stack of data drives and produced a battered chip. Old Dominion schematics. Partial, heavily encrypted. Might help. But it's incomplete, so you'll still be going in half-blind. Selena accepted the chip reverently. Thank you. Rurik's eyes flicked between the two of them. I'm not doing this for free. I want something in return. Orion tensed. Name it. I want Arcus gone, Rurik spat. He destroyed my life, forced me to build weapons that slaughtered entire colonies. I want to witness his downfall, or at least know that it's inevitable. Selena regarded him solemnly. You have my word. We will do all in our power to bring him down. Rurik nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then I'll do what I can. But I won't join you on this mission. I've done my part. Any further, and I risk more than my life. I risk my mind, my soul. I can't face him again. Orion clapped a hand on Rurik's shoulder. I understand. Thank you for the schematics. While Selena tapped into the data chip, scanning the partial maps of the Citadel's interior, Rurik pulled Orion aside. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial hush. Are you sure about this, Orion? Do you even understand what Selena is? The Dominion calls her the gravity siren. She can tear warships apart with a whim. If she turns on you. Orion's jaw tightened. She won't. I trust her. Rurik shook his head with a grimace. I hope your faith is not misplaced. Moments later, Selena disconnected from the data interface. We have enough to plan an infiltration, she announced. Though the risk is enormous. Rurik gave them final instructions for navigating the asteroid field undetected. Then, with a weary sigh, he escorted them back to their scout ship. May fortune favor you, he said softly, standing at the threshold as they departed. If you succeed, 1,000 enslaved souls might finally find release. Flying out of the asteroid belt, Orion and Selena plotted a course back toward Dominion territory. Their plan, slip into the Citadel's docking perimeter under the guise of a small trade vessel, using one of Orion's alternate identities. With Selena's abilities, they might mask certain energy readings that would otherwise expose them. Once inside, they would infiltrate the restricted sectors and sabotage the arc reactor's main conduits. On the flight, they pored over the partial schematics. There were glaring gaps, but they identified a potential route, a series of narrow maintenance tubes leading close to the reactor. The primary challenge would be evading Arcus's personal guard and the advanced security drones that patrolled those corridors. Selena's face remained set in grim focus. Her freedom had come at an unimaginable cost. She had to risk it all by returning to her prison. Yet her eyes gleamed with a sense of purpose that Orion found inspiring, if terrifying. He, too, understood the gravity of what they were attempting. If they failed, Arcus would not merely recapture Selena, he would likely punish entire star systems to make an example of them. Upon emerging from hyperspace near the Citadel, Orion was struck again by its colossal form. It loomed against the starry backdrop like a predator. Lights along its hull glimmered menacingly, and large docking gates stood open, accepting a steady stream of cargo ships, gunboats, and troop transports. Orion toggled his transmitter to a specific channel. Dominion Control, this is Lightfoot Vessel Y-73, requesting docking clearance for routine supply delivery. After a tense pause, a voice crackled back, transmit clearance codes. He punched in the codes, which he had painstakingly forged. A nerve-wracking moment followed. Then the voice returned, codes verified. Proceed to docking bay 9. They exhaled simultaneously, relief washing over them. Selena quietly molded a gravitational field around the ship's interior, making it appear smaller and less remarkable on the Citadel's scanners. Her brow beaded with sweat from the effort, but it remained stable enough to pass cursory inspection. As they approached docking bay 9, a large portal slid open, allowing them entry. The bay was a hive of activity, with heavily armed sentries and robotic loaders scuttling across the deck. Orion eased the ship onto a landing platform, engine cycling down. The moment the ramp lowered, Dominion officers approached, scanning the hull. Orion stepped forward in a subdued uniform, forging a polite smile. Selena kept her face partially obscured by a hooded cloak, blending into the background. They had prepared false manifests listing mundane cargo items, metal ores, spare parts, and ration packs. A board officer checked the data pad. Everything in order. You'll have to wait in the cargo lounge until the inspection is complete. Orion nodded. Understood. He gestured for Selena to follow. They left the ship, crossing the bustling deck to a corridor leading into the Citadel's interior. Security checks lined the walls, but Selena subtly bent the sensor's readings, allowing them to pass without raising alarms. Orion's heart hammered in his chest. The entire fortress thrummed with menacing activity, a place where any misstep spelled doom. At last, they reached a less crowded hallway. Checking the map Rurik had provided, Orion spotted an access door that led to lower maintenance shafts. The door was guarded by a single sentinel drone. Its sensors scanned methodically. A direct confrontation might stir an alarm, so Selena frowned in concentration, coaxing the metal walls to shift, quietly relocating the drone's sensor focus for a few seconds, long enough for Orion to slip a hacking spike into its override port. The drone's lights flickered, then dimmed. With the software, it powered down. Orion quickly tapped the door panel, overriding the lock. The door slid open with a sigh of pressurized air. They hurried inside, letting the door hiss shut behind them. Beyond, a cramped passageway led into the Citadel's underbelly. Pipes and cables dangled from the ceiling, and the air smelled of lubricant and stale coolant. Moving silently, they navigated twists and turns, guided by the partial schematics. At intervals, they encountered automated defense turrets or scanning sensors, each cleverly bypassed by Selena's gravitational illusions or Orion's hacking device. Eventually, they reached a wide, circular conduit that fed directly into the core chamber housing the arc reactor. A heavy blast door sealed the path. Its locking mechanism was advanced, well beyond standard Dominion design. "There's no easy hacking this," Orion muttered, studying the control panel. "We'll have to think differently." Selena stepped closer, placing her palm against the door. Her eyes turned distant as she reached out with her power, sensing the door's composition, dense alloys, microlayered to withstand extreme force. She inhaled deeply, focusing on the gravitational interplay within the metal's molecular structure. Slowly, she began to warp it, a subtle bending of the door's edges. But sweat streamed down her face. Manipulating something this reinforced was strenuous. "It's too strong," she ground out, voice taut with effort. Orion's mind raced. "Let me try something." He placed the enslaving bracelet against the door's locking panel, recalling that the device bore Dominion coding. With swift keystrokes on his portable terminal, he triggered a handshake protocol between the bracelet and the lock. The system recognized the device as an authorized Dominion control unit, albeit old and partially corrupted. A beep. Then, with a thunderous groan, the blast door lurched open. Selena sagged in relief, wiping perspiration from her brow. They passed through, entering a chamber dominated by a massive cylindrical reactor that pulsed with a bluish radiance. Arc-shaped conduits snaked outward in all directions, distributing power across the citadel. Monitors and generator coils lined the walls. The entire chamber buzzed with an uncanny hum, as if reality itself trembled under the reactor's presence. Selena approached warily, eyes narrowed. "I can sense it. The gravitational field here is twisted, anchored by something ancient." Orion consulted the schematics Rurik had provided. "We have to disable those main conduits," he said, pointing to 4 large nodes spaced around the reactor's perimeter. "If we sever them, the reactor goes dormant." They split up, moving to opposite sides of the chamber. Orion placed detonation charges, designed for surgical blasts, on the first conduit. He double-checked the timers, ensuring they wouldn't cause an outright meltdown. Across the room, Selena hovered near the second conduit. She extended her hands, harnessing a localized gravity spike that disrupted the node's function without destroying it completely. Suddenly, klaxons wailed. Red lights flared overhead, and a robotic voice announced, "Intruder alert in reactor core. Armed response teams, converge immediately." Orion's gut clenched. "They found us. Hurry." He slapped the final charge onto the last conduit, priming the remote trigger. "Done," he shouted, sprinting back to the chamber's center. Selena joined him, face lined with urgency. Before they could flee, the main door slid open. A squad of Dominion troopers charged in, plasma rifles raised. Leading them was a towering figure in ornate battle armor, a man whose grim visage Orion recognized instantly from countless wanted holos. Emperor Arcus himself. Arcus raised a gauntlet hand. "Cease this madness," he commanded, voice echoing through the reactor chamber. "Selena, you dare betray me? Return to your rightful master at once." Selena's eyes flared with anger. "I was never yours to begin with." Arcus sneered, leveling a massive energy weapon at her. "You forget your place." With his free hand, he made a gesture, and Selena staggered, as though an invisible vice clamped her mind. The partial bond that still connected her to the device flared painfully. Orion rushed to her side. "Selena," he cried, fumbling at the bracelet. It glowed erratically, caught in a tug-of-war between Arcus's override command and the reprogrammed link Orion had created. Arcus advanced. Your meddling with the device is pitiful. You cannot hope to sever my hold on her. Surrender now, and I may spare your miserable life. Selena shook, trying to break free from Arcus's mental onslaught. Her face twisted with anguish. The centuries of subjugation left a scar that Arcus could exploit. Summoning his deeply ingrained code, he sought to reassert complete control. With each step he took, Selena felt the weight of her old chains threatening to crush her newly won freedom. But Orion refused to let that happen. Gritting his teeth, he pressed his hand over the bracelet, focusing his will. He wasn't a telepath, nor did he have any special powers, only determination and the reconfigured quantum link. If the device indeed carried a trace of his empathy, perhaps he could counterbalance Arcus's cruelty. Selena, he shouted, pouring every ounce of conviction into his voice. You have a choice. Break his hold. Remember who you are. She gasped, staring at Orion. Within the swirling energies of the device, she felt Arcus's compulsion like a blazing brand, and Orion's supportive presence like a cool current of relief. She had served Arcus for so long, tortured and manipulated, but now she tasted freedom. To surrender would be to cast aside everything she had gained. With a defiant scream, Selena unleashed her gravitational powers in a mighty surge. The air rippled violently. Dominion troopers were knocked to the floor, their armors crumpling under the incredible force. Arcus staggered, forced to brace himself against a console. His override command faltered. You dare? He bellowed, struggling for balance. He aimed his weapon at Selena, firing a deadly burst of energy. Quick as thought, Selena warped gravity around the beam, redirecting it into the nearest wall. The explosion sent debris raining down. Orion, taking advantage of Arcus's temporary disarray, hit the remote trigger on the charges he had placed on the conduits. The blasts erupted in controlled bursts, severing the reactor's main lines. Sparks and arcs of electricity danced across the chamber. A deep hum devolved into an angry, discordant wail. Monitors flickered, and the entire citadel trembled as backup systems scrambled to compensate. Arcus roared in fury, the floor shaking beneath him. You will all pay with your lives. You've doomed yourselves. This entire fortress will tear itself apart. Yet Selena remained resolute, defiance shining in her eyes. Not without taking you down first, Arcus. Enraged, Arcus lunged forward, activating an energy blade on his gauntlet. Selena braced herself, but Orion leaped in the way, brandishing a compact pulse pistol. He fired repeatedly, each shot reflecting off Arcus's advanced armor, but they managed to slow the Emperor's approach. Selena mustered one final surge of gravitational energy, concentrating on the armor's joints. The metal buckled, and Arcus growled in pain, dropping to one knee. This is impossible. I am Emperor Arcus. Orion seized the moment, delivering a blow to Arcus's weapon, knocking it aside. Selena added a wave of crushing pressure, forcing Arcus to the ground. For the first time, the tyrant looked genuinely afraid, his eyes wide as centuries of power slipped through his grasp. You have no power over me anymore, Selena hissed, her voice cold, each word underlined by the unstoppable gravity bearing down on him. Arcus tried to speak, but the weight around his chest cut off his breath. Droplets of sweat beaded his forehead. His control over Selena was shattered, undone by the bond she shared with Orion, a bond forged from compassion, not domination. In that moment, the Citadel's lights dimmed. Automated systems struggled to keep the fortress operational, but the arc reactor's partial shutdown left everything in disarray. Sirens wailed, and the decks lurched from failing stabilizers. The once impenetrable stronghold now felt like a mortally wounded beast. Selena locked eyes with Arcus, her gaze blazing with centuries of pent-up rage. She could end him then and there, crushing him like a tin can. Instead, she released the pressure just enough to let him gasp for air. Your reign ends here, she pronounced. With Arcus pinned, Dominion troopers lay scattered or unconscious. Orion dashed to the central console, triggering an emergency override to open a corridor back to the docking bay. We must go, he shouted to Selena, or we'll be trapped in this imploding fortress. She held Arcus's panicked gaze one last time. Live and face the consequences of your crimes, she said, voice trembling with anger and pity. Then she let the gravitational field dissipate enough for Arcus to remain pinned but alive. With sirens shrieking, flames sparking from control panels, and lethal arcs of electricity crossing overhead, Selena and Orion bolted from the reactor chamber. They raced through the corridors, narrowly avoiding debris from collapsing ceilings. The fortress reeled as backup generators flickered, failing to stabilize the Citadel's massive structure. At long last, they reached the docking bay. Their stolen scout ship sat battered but functional. Dominion personnel scrambled in chaos, some fleeing in panic. A final swarm of troopers tried to block them, but Selena unleashed a wave of inverted gravity that flung them aside like leaves in a gale. Orion powered up the engines, and the ship roared into motion, lifting off the deck. They soared into the void, the Citadel heaving behind them. Parts of its hull vented plasma, and sections of the fortress dimmed as the reactor's influence waned. Emperor Arcus, no longer the invincible overlord, was left amidst the ruins of his broken empire. Safe in the star-flecked darkness, the scout ship drifted away from the collapsing Citadel. Orion set a course to rendezvous with his own vessel, a larger craft called the Celestial Raider, hidden in a remote sector. On the console screen, they watched the fortress's meltdown from a safe distance. Explosions lit up the void, scattering debris. Smaller Dominion ships fled, powerless to halt the unraveling of Arcus's stronghold. Exhaling a shaky breath, Orion turned to Selena. She stood by the viewport, gazing out at the debris with a haunted look in her eyes. She had lived within those walls for centuries, enslaved, her gifts twisted to serve a tyrant's ambition. Now, with the Citadel's downfall, an era of torment ended. He approached softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "I never believed I would see the day. Arcus, perhaps he survived, but his empire has been dealt a crippling blow." Orion allowed himself a small smile. If he survived, he'll be on the run, hunted by his former allies, with no stable fortress to shield him. Selena's gaze shifted to the device on her wrist. The once-dreaded bracelet now rested quietly against her skin, a faint glow emanating from its altered inscriptions. "I can still sense the bond," she said, voice gentle. "Only now, it's a bond of trust." Orion placed his hand over hers. "You're free, Selena. If you wish to sever the connection entirely, we can find a way." She met his eyes, an unspoken warmth filling her. "No," she whispered. "This bond has set me free. It doesn't enslave me. It guides me. I choose to keep it." A weight seemed to lift from Orion's chest. "Then we'll stay together," he murmured. "There's a whole galaxy out there, star systems liberated from Arcus's shadow, some still in need of help. And we have a ship, the Celestial Raider, to call home." Her lips curved into a genuine smile, her posture radiating hope and possibility. The centuries of darkness etched in her eyes began to soften, replaced by a quiet determination to chart a new path. "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. In the distance, the final embers of the Citadel's collapse flickered out, swallowed by the star-dappled void. As they drifted onward, Selena and Orion silently pledged to use their combined gifts not for oppression, but for healing, a promise that resonated through the cosmic tapestry like a new dawn. They docked at the Celestial Raider, a sleek starship waiting in the far reaches of space. Its corridors felt inviting, comfortable in comparison to the Citadel's cold labyrinth. Orion showed Selena to a modest cabin, offering her a place to rest. But before she retired, they paused at the observation deck, where a panoramic window revealed shimmering nebulae and distant galaxies waiting to be explored. Selena, still grappling with the enormity of her liberation, gazed out in silent wonder. Orion stood by her side, arms folded, a sense of quiet contentment lighting his features. For the first time, the future felt boundless, unfettered by the Dominion's oppressive yoke. "So," he said lightly, breaking the hush, "where shall we head first?" A thoughtful expression crossed her face. "Somewhere new, untouched by Arcus's reach," she replied softly. "A place where I can truly feel the cosmic currents, unafraid of any leash. Then, maybe, we can find others who suffered under Arcus and help them rebuild." Orion dipped his head in agreement. "That sounds like a worthy goal." They shared a final, lingering moment of reflection, the bracelet on Selena's wrist pulsing faintly in time with her heartbeat. The Dominion might not be gone entirely, but its tyrannical figurehead lay broken. In the grand tapestry of the stars, a new chapter had begun, one in which Selena was no longer a weapon, but a woman forging her own destiny. And Orion, once a lone artifact hunter, had found a companion whose spirit matched the endless horizon of the cosmos. With a gentle hum of engines, the celestial raider pulled away, charting a course into unknown sectors of the galaxy. Beyond the Dominion's fallen shadow, Selena and Orion embarked on a journey of discovery, guided not by chains of compulsion, but by the promise of freedom and by the powerful bond of trust they had forged. In time, their names would pass into legend, symbols of hope for a galaxy that had long yearned for deliverance. And so their story, born in the darkest depths of the Dominion Citadel, ended not with sorrow, but with a stirring sense of victory and the bright gleam of possibility. A new day dawned in the stars, and the future shone wide and welcoming, beckoning them toward all the wonders yet unseen.